before we begin, Donald WG, what's the WG? Is that part of your first name or?
Yes, the WG is my middle initials,
Okay.
and I started using them for music because there's more than one Donald Lindsay playing the pipes. Um,
Okay.
this probably matters a wee bit less for folk singing than it does for piping. But for piping, we were at the stage where Donald F. Lindsay, who's by far the more established piper, he's been
Ah,
on the go since the 1970s, I believe, was the first overseas competitor to win most of the major piping competitions in Scotland. And he's based in the east coast of the United States and has taught, I think, many of the pipers I've met anyway, many of the good pipers I've met from the eastern United States have been taught at some point by Donald. So I was getting emails for his students, from his students, asking about lessons. And for all I know, he was getting emails asking him about small pipes and extended range small pipes. So I started using my middle initials, and shortly after that, Donald started using his middle initial F. So Donald F, Donald WG. There are other Donalds on the pipes too, Donald Lindsay's on the pipes, but
amazing.
they're not quite as not as conspicuous. So we're the ones that are going around using our middle initials.
Yeah, it's funny because I mean I've never interviewed anybody, a pipe player before, and the fact that there's two Donald Lindsays, or maybe even more, is even more amazing.
Yeah,
So Donald WG Lindsay, as opposed to Donald, what's his middle name?
Donald F.
Okay.
Yeah.
Uh, has a brand new album out, and the album is titled Two Boats Under the Moon. This is, for those of you that can see it, this is what it looks like. And it's a double CD album. And let's begin this interview by talking about Donald and where you came from, what your influences were, and how you got into playing pipes. Because it's, here, maybe in Great Britain, it's a more popular instrument to play, but here in the United States, of course, it's not. Talk about your involvement in that and how you got into it.
Yeah, so I first became interested in pipes having heard my dad play, and my dad didn't play much, but he'd play the chanter a wee bit and he'd play the pipes a wee bit. And when I was growing up, I didn't latch on to that immediately, but after I left home, I heard some other pipers playing, and that turned my attention back to the pipes. I was already singing by that point and already singing folk songs and into folk music. And so it was in the context of folk music that I got back into the pipe, which is not the usual route. If there is a usual route for pipers, it's more often, or traditionally, it was more often through pipe bands. And so getting into it through family is fairly typical. And most reasonable sized towns and villages in Scotland have a pipe band.
Hmm.
And those that don't, there's always pipers. And even in a small village like St Margaret's Hope, where we've moved to live in Orkney, there's a handful of pipers, and there's a kind of de facto village piper, Herbert Mackenzie, who I've become friendly with. So it in Scotland certainly, and I think in Ireland as well, it is common in that way. Most people know somebody who plays. There will be particular parts of Scotland where that doesn't hold, but certainly here in Orkney, there's quite a lot of pipers, and throughout Scotland there's a presence, there's a significant presence for the instrument. I believe the place with the highest number of pipers per kind of square inch, if you like, is Northern Ireland. There are a lot of bands out of Northern Ireland, and when I was playing in pipe bands in my teens and early 20s, the Northern Irish bands had a habit when they did come over the water and compete in games in Scotland of kind of swooping in and taking the top prizes. So they have a lot of players of the pipes there. But yeah, like you say, I think it's probably a lot more common. Less so further south. So further south you go into south of the border into England. Funnily enough, one of the oldest pipe bands in Britain is in the north of England, but with a higher population and I suppose less kind of less kind of connectedness to the instrument or less cultural sort of inclination for it, it sort of slips out of view, I think.
Now, aside from the pipes, did you start on another instrument? Do you still play any other instruments, or is it strictly pipes?
Guitar. I was on the guitar long before I was on the pipes. Like I say, I got into folk music before I got into piping itself. And so I was singing and playing folk songs long before. So in my mid-teens, I think I maybe really got going on the guitar. Oh, Peggy Gordon, you are enough. Come set maiden upon my knee, and tell me a very why I am slated so by thee. I am lost, I cannot deny. My heart lies troubled in my breast, but it's not for me to let the world know. A troubled heart can find no rest. I turn my head to a cask of it was my fancy so to do, for when I'm drinking I'm seldom thinking and wishing Peggy Gordon was here. Sailing over the deepest ocean, where love careless over me. I wish he was in a lonely valley, where womankind cannot be found, where all the small birds they change their voice, and every moment a different sound. Oh, Peggy Gordon, you are my darling. Unto Davy, a very reason why I am slated so by thee, why I am slated so by thee.
Let's jump back to the album. How did the album come about, and why did you record this album? And tell me about it, the whole process of doing this.
Yeah, so this has been a long time coming, and a couple of things prompted me. Friends who've known me a long time, I've sung, as I say, for a long time, and I've sung in kind of a community and a social context for a long time, and been involved in things like the Glasgow Sing Around. Friends have prompted me. Alistair Roberts has been a friend of mine since I was busking, in the kind of teenage years. I met him when we were I think we were about 16, 15 or 16. And I met him at a party in Callander in the Trossachs when my friend Brian had invited us up to this party where he was going out with Alistair's sister at the time. And he told us about our brother who was a little older, who was our age, and played music. So I went to the party, and I think we were sitting playing guitars before we actually struck up a conversation. Now, last year, Alistair and me finally got around to doing something together by way of touring. We've always kind of followed parallel tracks. I've always been much more involved with the pipes and with the piping scene and with community music making. And then we decided that we would finally do a tour together. And so that was one thing that prompted me to start thinking about recording some of my songs. And Alistair's always encouraged me to think about doing that. And another thing that prompted me was that, 2020, we were out in Ascension Island for 3 years. And I had released an album of experimental music on the pipes with my friend Richard Youngs, who's an experimental musician in Glasgow. And it did quite well. It was on the BBC and so on, and got on to Late Night Unwind. And then there was an interview with me that went out on BBC Radio 4 Today. And so it was quite visible. And as a result of this, I think, Iggy Pop played not a track off of that album and not a piping track, but a song. And it was the only song I'd ever put online. It was a Burns song, Good Wife Couldn't Lie. And played it, praised it on his show on BBC Six Music. And people got in touch off the back of that and asked me if I had an album. And I thought, well, I thought I better get on with this. I better do this because people are interested and are enjoying the songs. So those two things, I think, between them, Alistair's encouragement, other friends' encouragement, some of the songs that are on the album are well known to friends in folk circles, like Johnny Blue as well. That one's a particular favourite with my friends. Neil McDermott, that hosted us for the launch at the Girvan Folk Festival, has been a fan of that one for a while. There's quite a few songs on the album that are like that. They're well known. I sung quite a few of them when I was involved with there was a folk night in the 78 in Glasgow that I was involved with for at least a couple of years when I was living in Charing Cross, that was run by Mike Hastings at Trembling Bells. Alistair sang at it. Alex Nielsen, who's Alex Rex, he was known to pop up there. And so I would sing these songs at that night and nights like it. So there's been a kind of a general awareness. And as you probably gather, I've been floating around singing like that and kind of engaging with music in that way for a long time. But actually putting things down on record, I think I maybe avoided it for a while because for a while I didn't like the idea that you would record something and that would be it. And that would then be the kind of definitive version of that song. It actually gave me the creeps. I'm talking about a few years ago, but there was a point at which it gave me kind of gave me the willies thinking of making a definitive recording instead of just kind of constantly reinventing the song.
Talk about the Lindsay system. What is that?
Lindsay system. So the Lindsay system is, now we're going to get quite esoteric here. You ready for this, Artie? It's chanter, which is the part of the pipes that you play the tune on. That terminology goes for pretty much any kind of bagpipe when talking about them in English, whether it's the Highland bagpipe or the small pipes, or whether it's the Irish pipes or any other kind of bagpipe, because there's loads of different kinds of bagpipe, as you may be aware. And the chanter is the part that you play the tune on, the part that's got the finger holes. Normally it hangs off the front of the bag. There are some kinds of bagpipe, European pipes, where it comes out the underneath and the drones go over the front. Catalan bagpipes are like that. But normally it sticks out the front and you play the tune on it. And in the case of most bagpipes, because of the way bagpipes are, most of them have an octave of range, roughly. One or two kinds have maybe 2 octaves. So like the Irish pipes, the Northumbrian pipes, the French musette. One or two others have maybe 2 octaves max. So the Lindsay system, it's a chanter for the Scottish small pipes. And the Scottish small pipes, to put this in context, if you can imagine, kind of building on what we're saying about the kind of prevalence of pipe bands and how common pipers are effectively in many parts of Scotland. If you can imagine, a lot of young pipers involved in pipe bands, marching in parades, competing in piping competitions, and a certain proportion of these pipers are interested in playing folk music as well. So during the folk revival, by the time we got to about the 1970s, late 1970s, early 1980s, a formerly forgotten instrument, the Scottish small pipes, had been revived by a Northumbrian pipe maker. So a maker of the Northumbrian small pipes had revived this instrument for friends of his who played the Highland bagpipes, because a set of big pipes, it's not very easy to kind of integrate. You do get bands like Brayback and so on that do very well, and the Tannahill Weavers have done it for many generations of folk music. I'm making it sound very ancient now, but they have been doing it since the 70s. They've been integrating the pipes since around about that time. But around about the same time that bands like the Tannahill Weavers started to come up, the small pipes started to emerge as a thing. And what they allow pipers to do is to take their repertoire and all their technique and to have an instrument that they can then join in a session with without being super loud and in a different key. And so that's how the Scottish small pipes, sort of the revival, took place of the Scottish small pipes. There was an earlier instrument, but it was in a different key, and it was extinct, if you like, as a playing instrument by about 1900, I think. And so the revived instrument's a wee bit different. It's in A or D, so it's in popular keys. And what it allows pipers to do is to join in with sessions and join in easily with other musicians.
Donald, do you have a website?
I do, yes. DonaldWGLindsay.com. Yeah. And there's also instruments.com for anybody wanting to find out more about the chanter, because obviously it's hard to put across that kind of information without losing a lot of listeners.
Wait, the chanter?
Yeah.
What is that?
The Lindsay system chanter. So yeah, like I was saying, I think I probably waffled a bit when talking about the small pipes, but basically it's a design for a small pipe chanter, but that has 3 octaves range. And it's open source. I originally made it using 3D printing. It's an open source instrument, and myself and some friends who've collaborated with me on it since, including Juan Chow, we've developed a version of it that is home printable and can be downloaded from Thingiverse. If you type Scottish small pipes into thingiverse.com, then you can find that there. We've got a little community developing around that instrument now. There's a piper, Malin Lewis, who's quite well known in Scotland now, who plays it and who has made their own version of it using traditional methods out of wood. I'm continuing to make it out of 3D, make it using a 3D printer in the traditional way.
You kind of lost me, I have to be honest.
Yeah, okay.
When you're saying, I don't understand this connection with a 3D printer.
Yeah, okay.
Explain this again.
No problem. So in about 2006 up to about 2013, I was working quietly in the background on an idea that I had for a Scottish small pipe chanter that would have 2 to 3 octaves range. So to allow all those players who enjoy the small pipes and who participate in folk to be able to play more tunes, basically, because your 1 octave that you get with the Scottish small pipes normally only covers a certain number of tunes. So good to have more notes. And so I had this idea, and it was a beautifully simple idea that gives the small pipes 3 octaves without any complication, any keys, anything like that. And in about 2013, I discovered a maker's lab in Glasgow that lasted a short while called MacLab. And I got involved there and discovered 3D printing. And all of a sudden, I was able to bring all these ideas together in one place and make this instrument happen. So I had a 3D printed bright green chanter in my hand that played 2 to 3 octaves. And I worked on it for about a year. From there, I ran a Kickstarter project in April 2014, which raised, I think, about £5,000 to buy a couple of printers and some filament. And from there, we went in about 3 years. 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18, 4 years, we arrived at the point where we had this instrument working and a small number of pipers playing it. And the Piping Centre had got to hear about it and decided that this was significant for piping. The Piping Centre is a piping school in Glasgow, and they run a museum of piping. And Roddy McLeod, who was the director at the time, asked me if I would give them a prototype for the museum. So basically, this instrument's gone into the history now of piping. And yeah, it's pretty cool. A young piper, Malin Lewis, who was studying in a specialist music school in the Highlands at the time, got in touch to ask whether or not I would make a chanter for them. And I went one better because I found out that Malin at 16 was already making their own pipes. I had always wanted for this 3D printed design to be reproduced in wood in the traditional way. And so once I met Malin and saw what a brilliant piper they were and still are, and also what a talent for pipe making and craft, I said to them, would you like to be the one to make this in wood? And, rather than me give you one. And Malin immediately said, yes, definitely. 6 months we collaborated on that. Malin's now got an album out, Halo Climb, on this chanter, on this Lindsay system chanter. Yeah, well, thanks very much for having me, Artie. It's been great talking with you. A real pleasure.
Same here.
Yeah, and I'll send the videos along, and I'll see if I can record something with the 12 string as well. Oh, that's my. You see, I just
Lost your
lost all.
light. That's
I
did
lost
you
my
have
light.
a blackout?
Yeah, it was the computer all along. It was the
Have a
computer all
great
along.
day, Donald.
Yeah, and you, Artie. Cheers. Thanks very much.
All right, bye-bye now.
Two boats under the moon. Nobody comes nor goes, nobody says nor knows. And we all may come and